yesterday, what we were doing was to practice for the second task of the speaking section. And we finalized that practice yesterday, of course. And having done so, we have finalized as well with the second task of the speaking section because we review it theoretically and also practically. Now it's time for us to move to the third task of the speaking section. That, as you're going to notice, is very similar to the second task, but in my opinion, a little bit more difficult, let's say. But don't worry, because I think that through a good understanding of what to do and practice, it's easily manageable. So please let me open my presentation and we'll start. Okay, here we are. So I was mentioning before that this third task is very similar to the second one. And I was not lying you because trust me, this task, the third one, is basically the second task's twin because it's very similar in the structure you have to use for responding, in the structure of the question itself, the way it is asked, the material, everything is very similar. And well, now that Romanev has joined us, we're going to start. Oh, very good. Everybody is joining us. Great. All right. Here we are. Awesome. Great. So thank you very much, Claudia and Romanev, for joining us as well. So I was mentioning here to Elsa that we're going to be, in this case, that we're going to be discussing the third task today, because remember, for those of you who were present yesterday, we discussed the second task and we practiced it, right? And we had a very good time, I think, practicing this second task. We managed to clarify some doubts, we managed to observe different things, and we also practiced for different exercises, right? We had a very good time. Elsa, you have a question? I see that you have your microphone open. No question?
No, sorry, I didn't realize my microphone was off.
No, it's okay. Don't worry. Thank you very much, Elsa. Great. So, very good. So let us start with the third task of the speaking section. What is this task all about? Well, very simple, dear students. This task is, as I was mentioning here to Elsa before you arrived, this is basically the second task twin, because it's a very similar task with regard to the structure you have, with regard to the composition of the question itself, with regard to how you responded, what material you receive for responding the question, everything is very similar. So let us start and go straight to the question. So as you can see here, the only difference between the second and the third task, and listen to this very well because it's literally the only difference between the second task and the third task, is that in this one, you will be dealing with academics, just like many other questions and tasks in the sections of the TOEFL exam also do. You will be reading a short passage, as you did in the second task, you remember, of 80 to 100 words long, and it will be discussing an academic topic. The only difference in this third task from the second one is that when in the second task you had the opportunity to read and listen to material that was concerning academic stuff in the sense of university activities, events, or associations, things that could be happening on campus. In this case, you're going to be reading and listening to material about academic subjects in academic material and academic topics, but those ones that could be taught in a university. Think about it, because in the second task, we were basically reading and also listening to things that happen, let's say, in the daily activities of the university, right? Changes in the bus service, for example, or changes in the schedule, or new activities, new associations, new programs, scholarships, etc. Nonetheless, in this third task, we're going to be going to the very much center and core of the university, that is, of course, the academic institution, the classes that the university offers. So as you can see here, in this reading passage, because in this case, in the third task, you will also be required to read the passage and also to listen to an audio recording. And the first passage you're going to read is going to be, as I mentioned, discussing academic topics. It can be, for example, a reading passage regarding a topic about biology, mathematics, physics, chemistry, could be astrophysics, computer science, medicine, nursery. I mean, anything that you can think of, and you say, okay, this could be taught in a university, that is something that you are going to possibly read about. I repeat, anything you can conceive that could be possibly taught in a university, that is something that you're going to likely read about, okay? So as I mentioned, the thing here is that you're going to read a passage, yes, but in this passage, you're not going to be reading about trifling and daily issues as in the second task. But as I mentioned, this reading passage is going to be about academic or scientific topics and subjects, okay? For example, imagine that your reading passage is about biology. So if your reading passage is about biology, then you're going to read about Darwin's evolutionary theory, for example. So for those of you who are joining us, I am, well, in this case, delivering a class on the third task of the speaking section. And I'm mentioning that this third task is actually very similar to the second one, because you're going to receive a reading passage and also you're going to receive an audio recording. Nonetheless, in this case, the topic of the reading passage is no longer going to be related to trifling and daily events on campus. But in this case, the reading passage you're going to be reading as the first material to analyze is going to be an academic subject. For example, if your reading passage is about biology, then you're going to be reading, let's say, about Darwin's evolutionary theory, right? Or something like that. Or if your passage, for example, is about history, then you're going to be reading about, let's say, the French Revolution, right? It depends. As I mentioned, you can receive topics from a very, very much varied set of different topics and subjects. It can be things regarding, for example, chemistry, physics, mathematics, computer science, nursery, medicine, anything you can think of. The point is that if it is taught in a university, trust me, it's likely to be here. Art as well, or for example, I don't know, architecture are also topics that you could be reading about, okay? So, well, after you read this passage, that as you can see is exactly the same length that than the second task reading passage as well, because remember, how long was the reading passage in the second task? It was from 80 to 100 words, right? In this case, how long is the reading passage in the third task? Well, it's also from 80 to 100 words. So as you can see, it's very, very much short. So it's not going to be a trouble, let's say here, the length of the passage. Now, maybe you're going to find this to be a little bit more difficult to read and to digest. Why? Because in this case, as I mentioned, the reading passage is going to be about an academic subject. Therefore, of course, the grammar, the vocabulary, the terminology that is used in academic and scientific discussions is certainly more difficult than daily and trifling discussions as the ones we were reading in the second task. So, well, you can get prepared for approaching that. And don't worry, because I'm going to be giving you a very good resource for you to go and practice this and to improve. But nonetheless, as I say, it's very good for you to, in order to improve this, in order to go, in order for you to go and learn, it's good for you to immerse your reading into academic subjects. If, for example, you like to read in English, but you are not reading scientific articles, or you are not reading, let's say, academic researches, or if you're not reading academic dissertations or something like that, that should be something that you should definitely read. Because when you are just reading, let's say, novels, or you're reading merely, well, literature that is related to entertainment, you are not going to actually learn or improve your reading for this part of the exam. So a very good recommendation for you, whenever you have the chance to read articles, scientific articles, right? Or as I mentioned, different researches, or for example, different academic magazines or something like that. I don't know, the magazine Science or any other one that you can think about. Please read it. It's going to be a very good manner for you to practice this particular part. Okay, very good. Anyways, so as I mentioned, after you read this passage, and by the way, how much time you have for reading this? 4 or 5 seconds, as in the second task. That's the reason why I tell you this is the second task's twin. It's a very similar task. So after you read this passage, that, as I say, it's very short, you're going to listen to another audio recording as you did in the second task. But now, as I mentioned, of course, this is not going to be a conversation anymore. Now you're going to be listening to a lecture. You know what is a lecture, right? A lecture is basically a class. It's a recording. Well, in this case, right, it's a recording of a class delivered by an actual professor from a university. For example, let's say that you go and, well, you read, let's say you read a passage about the French Revolution. So when you come to the listening part, right, because you're going to listen, as I say, an audio recording, you're going to be listening to a professor, to a history professor, talking about the French Revolution. He's going to be discussing the same topic you read about. So as I mentioned, if you read here, for example, about Darwin's evolutionary theory, then when you come to the conversation, you're going to be listening to a biology professor discussing Darwin's evolutionary theory, okay? So as you can see here, a lecturer will be giving you a few examples that complement the topic of the passage, and you will be required to give a short talk that summarizes the items. Here's how the timing works. So as you can see here, I mentioned that the lecturer, the person that delivers the lecture, the professor, in other words, is going to be talking about the same topic you read about, and is normally going to complement the reading passage. So for example, if here the reading passage, right, when you read it, is discussing a biology topic, let us imagine Darwin's evolutionary theory, as I was also illustrating before. If your reading passage discusses Darwin's evolutionary theory, then your professor here is going to give you some examples of Darwin's evolutionary theory. He's going to say, if you look at butterflies, for example, you can think about a very long history of, I don't know, natural evolution and natural selection. And then you can think about the human race, for example. And he's going to start to give some illustrations, some examples. He's going to make some points as well. But the point is that, as I say, the lecturer, the professor who delivers the lecture, will be discussing the same topic you read here in the reading passage, okay? So don't worry about it. It's not going to be difficult for you to understand it because, as I mentioned, you're going to have this background, okay? And by the way, maybe you are here saying, well, but what happens if I am not a specialist on biology and it turns out that my reading passage and also my lecture is about biology? What happens if I am a doctor, for example, and here my reading passage is about computer science and I have no idea about computers? That is something that shouldn't be any matter of concern for you. Why? Because here, students, what is your task in this third question of the speaking section? It's exactly the same you did in the second task. That is to say, summarizing, okay? Summarizing both materials. You're going to summarize the reading passage and you're going to summarize the lecture in this case, right? The class, the recorded class you're going to be listening. You don't have to, in this case, augment information. You don't have to complement the material by yourself. You don't have to add to this material any information of your own. The only thing you have to do, remember, is to be like a journalist. Why? Because you're going to receive information from different sources, in this case, from the reading passage and then from the lecture, and then you're going to prepare a summary. And in your response, you're merely going to deliver that summary. You're going to be summarizing, resumiendo, right? The reading passage and also the lecture. You don't have to add anything. And that's the reason why, if you are not a specialist on biology and your reading passage and lecture are about biology, don't worry. Why? Because you don't have to add anything. You don't have to pretend you know something about biology. No, because your only task is to summarize what they told you about the topic, okay? So it's never a matter of concern to think about, oh, but I don't know that topic. No, it's okay. Don't worry, because as I say, your only task is to summarize, okay? Very good. So here's how the timing works. As you can see here, you have 45 seconds, as I told you, for reading the passage, just as you had as well in the second task of the speaking section. Then for listening the lecture, you're going to have approximately 1 minute. It's not long. It's not something very extensive, so don't worry about that. But of course, maybe the lecture is going to be as well a little bit difficult to understand, depending on how used and how comfortable you feel when listening to academic discussions. If you are somebody who likes to, for example, listen to different scientific podcasts, or you like to listen, I don't know, YouTube videos regarding academic matters, well, you're not going to find this very difficult because the terminology and the grammar is not going to be new for you. But if until this point you have merely been watching movies in English about, I don't know, like let's say, any movie, right? Like, who knows, Jumanji or things of that sort, Of course, you're going to find this to be a little bit difficult, maybe, because as I say, the professors, of course, speak differently, right? They have another syntax, they have another grammar. So anyways, by practice, you're going to be able to get used to it. Okay, so don't worry. So as I mentioned, you have 45 seconds for reading the passage, 1 minute to listen to the lecture, and 30 seconds to prepare the response. In this 30 seconds, the only thing you have to do is to think about your summary of the reading passage and the lecture, right? And of course, to implement this summary to the structure that I'm going to show you later. So don't worry, we're going to listen to some illustrations before I show you the actual template or the actual structure for you to implement in your responses. But in this 30 seconds, that is what you should do, to take the information you gathered from the reading and from the listening and to implement it within the structure. That is what you should do, right? And then 60 seconds to respond, just as it happened in the second task. 1 minute in order for you to respond is not going to be difficult whatsoever, okay? So very good. Let me show you this on the simulator, and then I'm gonna give you some illustrations as we did last time, before, of course, I show you the structure and we discuss it, right? So please let me here open the simulator, and we'll start. Here. Okay. Here. Oh, this is speaking 3 already. Okay. Here we are. So the first thing you see when you are on the third task is some instructions, okay? You don't have to read, excuse me, you don't have to read, you don't have to read these instructions because it's not necessary, right? You know what to do beforehand. That is to say, you have to summarize the reading and also the listening, no more than that. So, well, after you see these instructions, you can press next very, very confidently because, as I say, you know what to do in the task. Anyways, afterwards, you're going to be having this particular menu on your screen. Here you have, again, some set of instructions. And here you have, well, as you can see, the reading passage, right? It's not longer than the passage you are already used to in the second task that we have practiced already yesterday. And as I mentioned, it's not going to be something very much difficult to read, at least with regard to the time, because the 45 seconds are sufficient. Now, as I say, if you are not that used to reading scientific or academic articles, maybe you're going to find it a little bit challenging, but don't worry, I'm going to be sending you some resources for you to improve your reading in academic areas. And as I say, you can do it by yourself by reading magazines, articles, research papers, I mean, whatever you can think about that is related to academic matters, okay? So after you read this, and as I say, you have 45 seconds, and here you have your chronometer, right? Always on your screen. When you have, well, actually throughout the entire exam, you are always going to have the chronometer available for you to check out how much time you have for completing the task or the section, right? It's not the exception here. 45 seconds are going to be available on your chronometer. What you have to do, well, is to read this passage before those 45 seconds. And as I recommended you in the second task, if you finish before the 45 seconds are over, my sincere recommendation would be don't press the button continue. Don't press next or continue and go to the next menu, but stay there. Stay there, take your pencil, take your sheet of paper, and start thinking about your summary. Let us avail and let us use every single second we have for us to improve our summaries, for us to, of course, perform the best possible or in the better possible way, right? So here we are. So after we read this passage and we have 45 seconds to do it, as we said, the computer is going to take you to this. As you can see here, once again, you have an audio to listen. As I told you, this is not a conversation anymore. This is a lecture. You're going to listen to a professor from the same subject you were reading about. For example, in this case, right? This passage is about principal negotiation. So I guess that this is something that could be taught in a business class. So here you're going to listen to a professor from the business department discussing this topic, the principal negotiation. So you're going to listen to him delivering his class, and you're going to listen how he complements the reading passage you have read. He's going to be discussing the same topic, that is to say, principal negotiation in this case, right? So, as I mentioned, while you're listening to this professor, take your piece of paper and take your notes on whatever he says, because the complements he does to this material, that is to say, if he implements and adds some point with regard to the passage you have read about, or if also additionally he offers some illustrations and examples or instances for you to comprehend the topic a little bit better, fantastic. Also take note of that, because it's going to be very important for you later on to mention those illustrations and examples whenever you are, of course, as I say, summarizing this material later on. Okay, so very good. After you listen to this, and as I say, you don't have to press anything. The computer does it automatically. You merely listen. The voice in your headphones says, now you're going to listen to a lecture, and it starts, right? Boom, you listen to the lecture. So I'm going to press next. And very good. So here, as I say, 30 seconds to prepare the response, 60 seconds to deliver the response, right? 30 seconds to do what? Well, to take the notes we have written, to to implement those notes and to prepare the summary in conjunction with the structure that I'm going to be giving you later. And then the idea is to simply take this and, of course, to offer a response in 60 seconds, right? No more than that. Elsa, I see that you have your microphone on. You have a question? Please tell me. Yeah, no questions? Okay, very good. Don't worry. Okay, so yeah, this is it. Now, let me show you some examples. Is there any question with regard to this material and to the point we have discussed it? Any clarification I could make? Please tell me. Romanes, Elsa, Claudia, is there any question with regard to the third task? Or something with regard to the menu? Perhaps tell me. No questions? Okay, no questions then. So let us see some examples, okay? You're going to understand way better through these examples. Here we are. Let me get in here. And let us start with our first example. Here. Okay, so as I said, we're going to read this passage together, and you're going to notice how different it is when compared to the passages we were reading in the second task, okay? So here we have it. I'm going to paste it here to the chat box and also to the WhatsApp group for you to read it there. And then we're going to listen to the lecture. Here I am. There you have it. And also here in the WhatsApp group. Okay, so let's read this together. It says the following, okay? Here we are. Okay, let us read this passage. Remember that you have 45 seconds to read this. Remember that this task is very similar to the second one in the timing you have for the entire task. 45 seconds for reading, 1 minute and a half for listening to the conversation, 30 seconds to prepare the response, 60 to deliver it, okay? So, well, we're gonna read this passage, okay? As you can see, it's a passage, in this case, about mitosis, okay? So let us start. It says the following. What is mitosis? In biology, the process called mitosis is a part of the cell cycle in which chromosomes are replicated and separated into two new nuclei. This is a process that only occurs in certain types of cells, called eukaryotic cells. Most animals undergo this type of mitosis, although the process can vary between one animal and the next. Errors sometimes occur during this process, which is how many forms of cancer come to be. These are typically caused by having too few or too many chromosomes in the duplicated cells. Some organisms also use mitosis as a form of reproduction. Okay, well, as you can see, it's not that much difficult anyways, but here you have it. This is more or less the complexity, although sometimes when you have topics about mathematics or physics, it turns out to be a little bit more complicated because, you know, those things like for average people like us are very, very much complicated, right? Physics and astrophysics and mathematics. But, well, Of course, the topics are aleatory. That is to say, you can receive this, or you can receive a topic about art that, well, of course, could be maybe a little bit more, well, manageable, right? It could be easier to get a topic about art, or let's say sports, right? The theory of the sports, something like that. But, well, we just can wait for the topic we're going to receive on the day of the exam. And by the way, it's always random. Everything on the exam is random. That is to say, the topics you receive are random. You cannot say, for example, hey, tell me the best day to go and take the exam because the easier topics are delivered on that day. Sadly, that is not the case because, first of all, ETS maintains everything with a lot of secrecy. And secondly, as I say, everything is random. They create exams some weeks before and everything is super random. So the only thing you can do is to practice for all types of readings. And that's the best manner to prevent any type of complication, I think. Well, now let us listen to a lecture of a biology professor on this topic, that is to say mitosis. And please, if you have a piece of paper, you have a pencil, or if you have whatever to take notes on, maybe your cell phone or your own computer, please help me by taking your notes as we listen to this lecture on mitosis, okay? Let us start.
Now listen to a lecture on the same topic.
Okay, so mitosis. Many of you might be wondering how this applies in the real world. Take the example of a cut on your finger. Why doesn't the cut stay open forever? Well, because the cells in your finger undergo mitosis. The body uses this process to repair damage and replace dead cells. It's not always a fast process. The cut on your hand will usually take several days to heal completely. The process of mitosis is at its most rapid when we're in our infancy. It has to be this way. Human beings grow rapidly during this time, so they need a lot of new cells to replace the ones which die and help the baby boy or girl to grow. Other animal species, such as the dog, undergo this process even more rapidly. Ever noticed how a puppy the size of your hand is the size of a small horse 18 months later? Well, the process which enables this rapid transition is mitosis too. Another and very different example of mitosis is that of bacteria. Most bacteria are asexual by nature, that is, they do not require a partner to reproduce. They use mitosis in order to churn out exact copies of themselves. Some bacteria, such as the one called Salmonella, can reproduce once every 20 minutes.
Okay, there you are. So as you can see, this could be a topic you will be receiving on the third task of the speaking section. In this case, we discussed the topic of mitosis. We read a passage about it, and then we listened to a professor discussing this on a lecture. As you can see, the lecture was approximately 1 minute and 34 seconds. So it's not too long. It's not too extensive. The point is, well, it's a little bit complex maybe to understand it, but anyways, we are going to practice a lot for this part, okay? So let us listen now to my response. And as always, please try to identify what type of structure I'm using in this question. And by doing so, trust me that you're going to be able to respond very easily. Okay, and by the way, the structure that I'm going to use, and you're going to notice it, is very similar to the one that I used in the second task. Now, also notice, and it's very important, that in this task, dear students, I'm also merely summarizing the topics, okay? You're not going to listen to me, for example, adding something, saying, hey, and by the way, I can say, right? And stating, for example, data that has not been mentioned in the passages. I'm not going to do so. Why? Because as I say, sadly, in this task, an integrated task, our opinion is not welcome. It's not very much allowed nor appreciated because they are not testing our capacity to defend ideas anymore. They are testing our capacity to synthesize information and also to connect it, and of course, deliver a summary that is very important, right, on any academic and labor activity. So please have in mind, you have to summarize everything as if you were taking the role of a journalist, okay? Very good. So please let me reproduce for you my response and try to notice my structure, okay?
Okay, in the reading passage, we have been immersed into the topic of mitosis, which is a process by which eukaryotic cells are replicated and separated into two nuclei. On the other hand, in the listening passage, we observe some practical applications of this phenomenon in the real world. For example, when we have a cut in our fingers, the way that they heal, or the way that the cut heals, is by mitosis, and the cells are reparated and the damaged ones are simply eliminated, and that way we heal. This process is also very much efficient and rapid in our infancy because we need to grow up, and it is the same case for dogs, because when they are puppies they can grow up super fastly into a completely large animal. Also, it happens in some bacteria which are asexual and do not need partners to reproduce, as for example Salmonella.
Great, there you are. So that is my response. As you noticed, I merely summarized the reading passage and I also summarized the lecture. Okay, very good. So before I show you the template and before we practice for this, let me please show you one more illustration in order to solidify any type of doubt or hesitation you may have. So please let me open this and we're going to listen to our second example, okay? Well, in this case, it's a topic called compassionate consumerism. Okay, let me paste it here to the chat box and also let me paste it to the WhatsApp group. There you are. Okay, let us read this together, all right? It says the following: compassionate consumerism. Compassionate consumerism is a relatively new trend in the American retail market. In this type of consumerism, when individuals make a purchase, a portion of the money they pay is allocated to a charitable cause. Nowadays, individuals often look for ways to contribute to the betterment of humanity, but they don't always have the financial resources to do so. Compassionate consumerism appears to be a good middle ground. While critics feel that it's only a marketing ploy aimed at appealing to people in their 20s and 30s, others applaud the effort. They argue that it is desirable for companies to sacrifice profits in order to help those in need. Okay, very good. So this is the topic, compassionate consumerism. I guess it's something that could be taught in a business class or, I don't know, administration. Not sure about it. If you know, tell me. Anyways, now let us listen to, oh, it's a business class here, it says, right? Very good. So now we're going to listen to a lecture delivered by a professor on the same topic. And please, as I always recommend you, if you have a piece of paper, if you have a pencil, please bring it with you and take your notes as we listen. Okay, very good. So please accompany me and let us listen to this lecture.
Now, as the reading suggests, many companies have embraced the idea of compassionate consumerism over the past few years. Studies show that customers are generally supportive of such efforts, especially very young shoppers. Not only that, but companies make a lot of additional profits from this kind of compassionate marketing. Some companies even thrive off of it. Now, take ABC Shoes, for example. They're kind of like the pioneer of this type of consumerism. You know the shoes, right? Those flat, simple slip-on shoes which are based on a type of traditional Argentinian footwear called an alpargata. Anyway, ABC Shoes achieved a huge market share about 7 years ago with their one-for-one business model. Basically, if you buy a pair of ABC shoes, they donate another pair of shoes to an impoverished individual. While this program has cost ABC Shoes a lot of money to administer, they've also made so much profit that they've expanded to include not only shoes, but also eyewear and coffee. Speaking of coffee, another famous company that has adopted the compassionate consumerism model is Bob's Coffee. Now, the one-for-one model doesn't make much sense for a cup of coffee, but a portion of the cost of certain items is sometimes donated to various nonprofit organizations. Since Bob's deals closely with coffee bean farmers in South America, they have recently launched a campaign where 10% of all purchases are donated to preserving the South American rainforest. And, would you believe it, on the day they announced the campaign, there was a line out the door at Bob's Coffee right here on campus.
There you are. Okay, very good. So now that we have listened to this lecture, it's time for us to listen to my response as well. So please let me show you my response on this particular topic, and then we're going to be sharing the structure in order for you to implement it into your responses, okay? Well, please let us listen to my response on this topic.
In the reading passage, we have been immersed into the topic of compassionate consumerism, which is a phenomenon that happens when people buy things knowing that a portion of their payment will be allocated to a charitable fund. Likewise, in the listening passage, we have seen a study that confirms that this practice and method is very much supported by young shoppers, and that it also promotes and helps enterprises to get additional profits. For example, ABC Shoes was a pioneer in this specific practice. They made some sort of shoes called alpargata. They had a one-for-one business model in which they received a purchase and they also gave away another shoes to a poor person. You also have Bob's Coffee, which basically receive a purchase and they donate one portion of that to an ONG. They are launching right now a campaign to help the South American rainforests.
All right, there you are. Very good. So it's time for us to now share the structure that you should also use in your responses, okay? Let me show it to you. I have it right here, I think. Very good. Okay, here we are then. This is the structure, if you noticed, that I was following in these two responses I show you, and also the one that you should imitate in your responses, okay? It goes like this. It also has 4 different steps, as you can see. And the first one is basically an introductory sentence, as always, and then here comes your summary of the reading passage. For example, in this case, the introductory phrase I'm using is, in the reading passage, we've been immersed into the topic of, and I would say this is a very handy introductory phrase because somehow, as you can see, the composition of the sentence I made forces you to mention the title, right? The title of the reading passage. So it's like, in the reading passage, we've been immersed into the topic of compassionate consumerism, mitosis, right? So I think it's a very good introductory sentence. Anyways, of course, you can change the wording if you want. Dear students, it's totally up to you, okay? And here is where you start with your summary of the reading passage. Now remember, as I told you before, it's a very good idea that if you're thinking about emphasizing on one part of your response, do not do it here. The reading passage, the summary of the reading passage is not that important in your response. This one should definitely be the shorter summary you deliver and offer in your response. Spend more time, emphasize more on the summary of the lectures in this case, not of the reading passage. It is not a good idea to invest more time here, to be very much specific, or to make a very detailed explanation of the reading passage. It's not a good idea. As I say, that shouldn't be something that that you should be doing in this case, okay? What about the second step? As you finalize the first step, right, that as I say consists in this introductory phrase, in this first sentence, and of course, your summary of the reading passage, as I told you very briefly and generally, not with a lot of details included, then you move to the second step. And this one, as you can see, also contains a transition phrase as we had it in the structure for the second task. In this case, the transition phrase is likewise in the listening passage, asimismo, right? Likewise in the listening passage. And here comes your summary of the lecture. As I told you, these lectures, and as you may have noticed as well, are very much complementary to the reading passages you read first. Because if you noticed, what professors do is to offer a couple of points that they consider to be relevant for their students to further understand this topic. And they also normally offer some illustrations and examples of this processes in the actual work. For example, coming back to mitosis, right? The reading passage explained us what mitosis was. And then the professor offered a very brief explanation of what mitosis was, and she offered 2 illustrations to demonstrate how this process actually works on our lives. And she said, have you ever noticed how a puppy the size of your hand grows up and becomes a very large animal very rapidly? And if you noticed in my summary, what I did was to mention, right? Likewise, in the listening passage, we listened to a professor saying that mitosis is a process that can be observed in puppies and dogs, because they are animals that are very much small and tiny at some point in their life process. They become very extensive animals in the future, right? So as you can see, my summary was basically mentioning the points the professor made. In this case, the only points the professor made, as I say, are the illustrations. Sometimes as well, professors actually add a little bit more of information or data to the reading passage. If that is the case, of course, include it in your summary, but normally they also include illustrations merely. So if you notice that your professor merely gives some illustrations and some, as I mentioned, some points, some examples or instances for his or her students to understand more, fantastic. Mention those illustrations and points in your summary. That's the only usage of the third and fourth step, that as you can see are there to remind you that in your particular summary, the first lecture's point, the second lecture's point should definitely be included. That is to say, if the professor mentions 2 examples about the topic you read about, mention them. If the professor, for example, decided to implement 4, 5, 6 different points and illustrations, also include them all here. Of course, as more topics you have, or as more points or illustrations you have in your lecture, that means that maybe you're going to have to reduce your time speaking about each of them. Nonetheless, of course, that is something that you can measure and that you can interpret on your own way. You can simply take all these points and illustrations and to arrange and order them in a manner that you consider to be, well, optimal, or in this case, that you consider to be advantageous, so that you have enough time to mention every single point, not maybe with a lot of profundity, but anyways, of course, with the necessary and sufficient depth for you to make it understandable and to make those points to be felt in your response, okay? So that's a matter of preference, and also, of course, as I say, of measurement. And you can do this by practicing, okay? But as I say, please mention all points and all illustrations. That's the point of the summary, to mention everything, but in a simplified manner. That's the definition of a summary, right? To mention everything that is important. And of course, the points are important, the illustrations are important, but in a very simplified and reduced manner, okay? That's a summary. So please make sure to include this, okay? Great. So is there any question, dear students, with regard to this particular structure, something that I could clarify? Elsa, Claudia, something here with regard to the structure?
What happened if I just like name one example of the lecture?
Okay. Well, good question. I guess that, I mean, I've always tried to include everything, but of course, I mean, as I say, this idea, this structure that I give you, are structures that I have created and that we have, of course, discussed with our team here in the company, because we have, let's say, in this case, summarized, and we have gathered a lot of exams and tests from people who have actually gotten very high scores. So what we're trying to do here is to give you the best tools and let's say routines or structures for you to go and, of course, point out to the high scores, right? But of course, as I say, if you miss one, if you miss two, and you merely mention one illustration or 1 point, of course, those are not capital sins. Anyways, you're not going to be, let's say, totally banned from the exam, or you're not going to be totally canceled, let's say, by the reviewer. But certainly, right, the reason why we're, in this case, including all the points and illustrations is because we consider that every single person who has gotten a high score in the exam has managed to include them, okay? So that the let's say the consequence of not including them could be, at a maximum, not having a very high score. But it's not something that, of course, we should worry about. If you somehow compensate let's say the absence of a point with a very good grammar, with a very good pronunciation, with a lot of fluency, with a fantastic syntax, of course, maybe the reviewer is also going to consider all those aspects, because the reviewer certainly takes a very much holistic review of everything, right? He doesn't merely focus on if you included all points, but he's very much, as I mentioned, very much considered, and very much, I would say in this case, is very much competent when reviewing these exams to mention and to consider different areas of your performance, okay? But yeah, that is what I could say, dear Claudia.
Thanks.
Okay, my pleasure. Any other question, dear students? Elsa, maybe?
All times when we try to do this activity, should we
Yes.
have mentioned that The lecture said in this point, the lecture gave this example, something like that.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, I think it will be a good idea, definitely. Like, especially at the beginning, when you're starting the summary itself, for example, as you can see in the introductory phrase, I say, right, in the reading passage, and the reason why I specify that this is mentioned in the reading passage is because I want to divide my response. I want to separate all points in my response so that everything seems very much organized, right? So yeah, when you mention specifically from what part you are deriving a particular commentary or information, it certainly adds more organization and, let's say, clearness to your response. So yeah, I mean, if you can, definitely, but it's not necessary at every single point. For example, when you are in the second step, you can say, right, likewise, in the listening passage, we listen to the professor saying this. So maybe in the third and the fourth step, it's not necessary to say, for example, well, the first lecture's point was, or the second lecture's point was. It's merely okay if you say, well, the first thing the professor said was, or secondly, the professor mentioned this, and thirdly, the professor added this, right? It's not necessary to always go and say the lecture, but of course, if you want to do it, it wouldn't be any problem. The idea is to, as I say, separate everything so that the reviewer understands very clearly what part of the commentaries or the material in this case you are reviewing or summarizing. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. Very good. All right, babe. I'm not sure if you have any other question. Okay, but before we finalize the class, let me do something for you. I have here a material that I want to share, but where we are, okay, here. So I'm gonna give you this, okay? I want to give you here, because remember that yesterday we practiced for the second task, and something that I want to do here right now is to use something that that we can use to start with our practice, because by the way, tomorrow, what we are going to be doing is to practice for this part, right? So please don't miss tomorrow's class. It's going to be a totally practical class for you to perfect every single detail of this. But now let me right now open this, and we're going to practice together for this section. So please, I want you to read this passage that you can see here right now on my screen. It's about Aboriginal people. And well, we're going to be practicing this material right now for us to have, let's say, a taste of what tomorrow's class is going to be. And please, I'm going to take your time here through my cell phone, okay? And you have, as I say, 45 seconds to read this passage about Aboriginal people. And as you can see, this could be something taught in anthropology or any other subject like that, right? So, well, please, dear students, you can start reading. Where do I? Give me a second. Here, you can please start reading this passage now. Okay, the 45 seconds are over. So please, now you can start listening to a lecture on the same topic. And please, if you're able, take your notes so that we can respond later. Okay, please start listening.
According to your textbook, the Aboriginal people are very diverse, and I would agree with that. However, there are certain beliefs that unite the groups, and in fact allow them to identify themselves and others as members of the diverse Aboriginal societies. For one thing, unlike the anthropologists who believe that tribes arrived in eastern Australia from Tasmania about 40,000 years ago, the Aboriginal people believe that they have always been in Australia and that they have sprung from the land. Evidence for this resides in the oral history that has been recorded in stories and passed down for at least 50 generations. This history is referred to as the dreaming. The stories teach moral and spiritual values and provide each member of the group with an identity that reflects the landscape where the person's mother first becomes aware of the unborn baby, or to put it in terms of the dreaming, where the spirit enters the mother's body. So, I am saying that the way that the Aboriginal people identify themselves and each other, even across groups, is by their membership in the oral history that they share.
Very good. So that will be our material for this first practice, okay? So please, all of you can start preparing your responses for this particular topic, dear students. You can start preparing your responses now. Very good. There you are. Okay. So please, dear Claudia, could you delight us, please, with your response for this question? Okay, you have 1 minute in order to respond, to summarize both materials. So please, you can start doing so now.
Okay, in the reading passage, we have been immersed into the topic of Aboriginal people. The topic says that physical characteristics change with the time, so there are great diversity of Aboriginal people. And likewise, in the listening passage, the professor said that they are very diverse, and they thought that they have always been in Australia, but they have come from Tanzania. So they identify themselves by because of their parts in the oral history.
Fantastic. Very good, dear Claudia. Very good. Okay, and now please, dear Elsa, you can start delighting us with your response as well now.
According to the topic about Aboriginal people, it says that it is very diverse and they have their cultural aspects like physical aspects and their customs. And according to the listening passage, it mentioned that Aboriginal people have been spread all the world, and they are very diverse, but there are some small groups that maintains their way of living.
Okay, thank you very much, dear Elsa. Great, I think that both responses are very good. I am very much happy with your performances here. And please, you know that tomorrow we're going to practice for this task the entire class, so please don't miss tomorrow's class, okay? Great, we're gonna stop here, okay? Having practiced that exercise and having tasted how it's set to perform on this third task. And please, I'm gonna tell your assistants before you go, and please help me with your kind responses to our daily poll, okay? If you have any question, any commentary, please let me know right now so that I can help you. Here we are. Here, okay, here you are. So we are with Elsa Maria. Very good. And here we are with Claudia Hernandez as well.
Yeah.
Great. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear students, for your responses. I'm going to be seeing you tomorrow in order to practice for this task, so please don't miss it and have a wonderful night, okay? See you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.